Let me introduce myself. I'm Joel Dimsdale. I'm an emeritus professor of psychiatry, and I moved here 25-ish years ago, and young Dr. Demaria here moved here 20 years ago. Today we wanted to talk with you a bit about an editor's perspective. Tony is Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Cardiology. He's been a longtime editor of Journal American College of Cardiology. I've edited a small subspecialty journal in psychiatry called Psychosomatic Medicine. We've all been on lots of editorial boards. Between Tony's gray hair and my no hair, we hope to give you a perspective on editing and very much want to get your thoughts. You've been doing this how long?
Coming up on 10 years.
Yeah.
So, just to get some information on the table, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology is one of the two leading journals in cardiology. Our friendly competition is with Circulation. It's very gentlemanly, but as fierce as competition in any other field. We have about 50,000 subscribers. Do you all know what the impact factor is? No? Well, you're gonna learn something important from this session anyway. The impact factor, you will appreciate this, is the ejection fraction of medical journals. It's the one number everybody knows. You know, the ejection fraction, the percent of blood you pump, is how well the heart works, and the impact factor is kind of that number for medical journals, and so we have good impact factor. You know, our impact factor is 14 in Japan. You have to publish one paper a year in an impact factor journal greater than 10 to get promoted. In Italy, you get promoted or reappointed by the product of the number of papers you've published and the impact factor of the journals they're published in. I mean, it's just a number. So in any event, we have a good impact factor. We make a lot of money for our society. We get about 6,000 submissions a year, about 120 a week for those of you not good at arithmetic, and our acceptance rate is about 8%. So that's kind of the position I've come from. I've held that editorship for 10 years now. I time out in 14, in July of 14, which will be good because we're a weekly journal. And, you know, I haven't had many weekends to myself for a long, long time, so that would be nice to have. Among the things we could talk about, obviously we need to talk about impact factor a little bit, but from a general perspective, some years ago, I took our associate editors, most of whom are senior faculty members here, and I asked them to all write down for me the most important attributes of a manuscript that led them to accept the manuscript, and the most important attributes that led them to say, this one's going to be rejected. And I compiled that. So if you would like, later on, we can talk about the 10 things that they felt were most important in aggregate, because actually a lot of the things were the same, as you might imagine, in making a good manuscript. But I would say simply that if you have a good project, you know, if the protocol's well thought out and it's well executed and analyzed, it's hard to screw that up. But you can do it. Believe me, you can do it. And what you can't do is if you got a crummy project and you forgot a ton of variables and executed it poorly and analyzed it inappropriately, mixing up, for instance, causality with association, there's no way you can take that and get it published. So you never, I don't think, in deference to my much more learned colleague, Dr. Dimsdale, I don't think we can teach you anything about how to salvage a crummy project, but we can sure keep you from crashing and screwing up a really good project in the presentation.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because you know, five ways to screw a paper up. I mean, I think the one is to be absolutely inarticulate, gosh, that's the quickest way. I think the second is to not pay the slightest bit of attention to instructions to authors. Now, each journal theme and variation, and editors and journals are different about how much they hold you to that. But if you send a paper in to Tony and you used American Psychological Association reference style, Smith and Wesson 1842, as opposed to Council of Medical Editor reference style 1, Tony or his office may be annoyed, may say, what's this person know about what this journal is? If they can't even do that. What are some other ways of messing up?
Well, the epitome of messing up, the editor of Circulation is named Joe Lascalzo. The recent editor of JAMA was Kathy DeAngelis, and every once in a while I get a paper submitted with a cover letter that says, "Dear Dr. DeAngelis." So you know it's been somewhere else before and rejected. Now that's poor form in general.
Yeah, none of us are naive. I mean, we know you're not necessarily going to shoot for our journal #1 or #2, but it happens. It's really embarrassing. Or they get the journal wrong. They get your name right in the journal, or it does happen.
Oh, it happens. It happens. Somebody asked me once, I did one of these editors' workshops at a national meeting, and somebody said, is it really important to say in the cover letter why this study is important and what's good about it? And my answer was, only if you haven't said it in the manuscript. But it's amazing. It's astounding that people write manuscripts and nowhere in there do they say this is the first study or this is the largest study, whatever's really important about it. There's no rule against that. You know, people who are reading the manuscript may not be familiar with the status of knowledge. You have to really get that across. What's really important. It's amazing how often that isn't done.
Well, one exception to that is I know some journals have this space where you can request accelerated reviews, wherein you write a letter, sell your article, and then ask for feedback whether or not it's worth waiting for the full reviews directly with the editor. I don't know if your journal or the journal you work with has that. But in that case, do you encourage us to go for it to save time, or just go through the traditional route?
put yourself in the seat of the, I'll answer first, put yourself in the seat of the editor, all right? That week, you've probably gotten 120 manuscripts, which means that they need to find 240 reviewers minimum, and maybe more. And so in comes this paper, and for expedited review, you've got to get 2 people to look at it right away in the field, give you a good opinion, then go over it yourself and adjudicate. And so it's really a hassle. It's really a hassle. The alternative is for one person to make the decision, which is a gamble, a real gamble. So that unless you have something that's red hot, I personally wouldn't advise. For our journal, you know, lots of people ask for expedited reviews. And if we'll look at it and we think it has no chance, of course, we'll tell them. But if they couldn't figure that out in the first place, you know, if it's truly expedited, we'll go ahead and do it, which means that we've got it all signed, sealed, and delivered in less than a week. But if we're not sure, then we tell them that we think they should go through the regular cycle.
I think it's usually not in your interest to do that. When I remember the ones that came in for expedited, our rules were that if it came back for a major revision, it was just automatically rejected. So, and you know, almost nothing goes through the first time. Almost nothing. I've written 500 papers. One paper was accepted the first time. You'd think I'd learned by now, but it just doesn't happen. And if you I mean, you always ask for revisions, okay? And if you put yourself in a situation that you're forcing the editor to make a very quick decision, it's a problem. I think Tony's point is that also the editors are busy. Every night I take papers home. I assign reviewers. I look at the reviews. I decide what I'm going to do. Don't have logorrhea. If you're gonna explain why your paper is important, say it in 2 sentences, not 3. It's counterproductive.
Yeah, to expand on your question, let me answer. You're all academicians with grants and whatnot. What percentage, of course I've done this study for my journal, not all journals, but I've done this study. What percentage of all manuscripts would you guess one reviewer puts in the highest category and the other reviewer puts in the lowest category? How many think it's 5%? 10%? 20%? 30%? 38%? Isn't that amazing? It's a crapshoot. I mean, you know, for years I sent off my papers, you know, I'd write them and things like that, you know, agonize over them and send them in and think there was some infallible deity who was looking at it. And in fact, you know, 38% in the 2-year period we looked at of the manuscripts, one person thought was wonderful and the other person thought should be rejected. And
this is where you need a good editor, and unfortunately you don't know that. Because a lot of editors they'll take a vote. You know, an editor is ashamed of taking an opinion, of taking a stance. You need a strong editor who knows his reviewers. And I mean, there's some of my reviewers who are hanging judges who never saw anything they liked ever. And then there's some hopeless liberals who let 1,000 flowers blossom. And if you've been around a long time, you get to know the reviewers. It's harder with bigger journals, a lot harder. But ultimately, it's the editor's choice. And then you get into these problems that we're always asking favors. We're asking you to review and work on the evening, and then if I don't heed your advice, you get annoyed. So it's challenging, challenging politics.
That's something to really keep in mind, that we have to be sensitive to the reviewers, because there are now, in cardiology alone, there are 80 journals, 80 cardiologic journals. There's one or two I miss every month, but you know, lots and lots. And so the same reviewer pool is largely getting hit for every single article, and their fatigue. Reviewing is one of the truly least rewarding things that anybody can do in terms of payback. It's very rewarding in terms of what you learn and whatnot, but you know, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to do well. You have to express yourself well if you're going to convince the editor that what you're saying is right. And then that review is anonymous to everyone except the editor. No one else ever sees it. So some people do, for us, people do up to 25 reviews a year. And think how many nights that is to pour over a manuscript critically and then to put your thoughts down on paper. And it hasn't done people much good. Now what we do now is we give awards. We give to our 50 best reviewers, we give so-called Simon Dack Award, which is Simon Dack was the founding editor, and then for the next couple hundred reviewers, we give a letter of commendation, and we send those letters to the department chair of the people who review, because it should be in their promotion file. It's an important contribution to scholarship, maybe one of the most important contributions to scholarship. And so we send them the letter. They can submit it themselves in their promotion file, but we send it to their department chair as well. But that's...
How do you define best reviewers?
Well, for us, you know, we take the number of reviews, the timeliness, did it take them a week or 2 or 3 or 4 to get it back, and then every review gets a grade by an associate editor on a scale of A to D about how useful it was, how valuable it was in making reaching a decision. And so at the end of the year we look, and those people who've done the most quickly with the highest value to us get the prizes.
Rate.
What?
The highest concordance rate on the outcome of the decision.
Right. Yeah, but it's pretty easy, as Joel says. You know, you can, after a while, you can almost tell what this. If I want to get a paper rejected, man, I can get it rejected in a heartbeat. I know the people who I send it to. I mean, they wouldn't accept the Lord's Prayer, you know, and just nothing's good enough for them that they haven't done.
Put yourself in the, what do you hate the most when you write a paper? I would say, yes, please.
I have something that I hate, doing a study, hypothesizing something, and then getting negative results. No change, or there's nothing interesting about the finding. Because then how do you spin the story in order to get the manuscript published, because it just seems that journals aren't interested in negative results, when in actuality, if you're unbiased in terms of science, it's important. If you hypothesize something based on current medical knowledge and whatnot, and then you find no change, that's important. People should know that, because then they won't repeat that. And maybe it's useful information for someone, but I've had a study where that happened, and it seems really hard to get that actually accepted. Do you have any advice about that? I mean,
it is easier to publish positive findings. It absolutely is easier. But it's absolutely incumbent upon you to make the case for why this negative finding is important. Is it negative because you studied 30 people and you needed 5,000 from statistical power to make the case? If so, that's not a very compelling sort of argument. I guess also getting back a little bit to impact factors, there are a lot of journals out there, and I disagree slightly with Tony. I mean, we all like to get our papers published in as impactful a journal as possible, but there are a lot of journals. And gosh, when I started out, I don't know, I sent my papers to the New England Journal. A couple times they came in, but it was usually dead on arrival, or this sort of thing. And I wasted my time, I wasted their time. One of the problems is that we see our papers as our children, and you gotta step back a little bit and not be so involved with the paper. If the paper's an interesting negative finding, okay, but is it really interesting negative finding? If it's just interesting, drop down a bit on where you want to send things.
Yeah, I would say, if it's not interesting, why did you ask the question in the first place? There's an inconsistency in what you're saying. If you posed a hypothesis that was worth testing, then it should be of some value, even if it's negative. If it's only of value if it's positive, then maybe the question wasn't so valuable to be studied in the first place. And so it probably is. And we take a lot of negative studies, but sponsors, are not happy with negative studies. Editors hate them because it hurts the impact factor. You all know what the impact factor is? It's a citation index. What you do is you take all the manuscripts published in a given year, and then you take all the citations to those manuscripts in the subsequent 2 years. You divide the citations by the number of citable articles, and you come up with the impact factor, which in the United States is not so important, but in the rest of the world is incredibly important. Your job depends upon it. But even here it does. I remember a couple of years ago when Ken Kashansky was chairman of medicine, he made all of us division heads send him the highest impact journals in our subspecialties, so that when promotions came up, people's manuscripts could be adjudicated by the level of prestige of the journals they were in. And that was basically by impact factor. And negative studies kill your impact factor because they hardly ever get cited.
So this is from the editor's point of view. So the editor wants a sexy, interesting negative finding. Maybe the editors aren't so thrilled about it. I mean, I don't think Tony or I don't think we really genuflect in front of the impact factors. Journals get a momentum, and we just try for quality as best as we can. Actually, you said something, I wasn't anticipating you were going to say that. I think most people were asked that point. Most people really, there are two issues that we have as authors. One is rejection, coping with rejection. And the other is being held in limbo. And so this is one of Tony's things where he rates reviewers on. There's no sin to saying, I can't do this. I'm too busy to do this. It's not in my area. I'm taking a vacation. I've got a grant due. We all love that. The worst thing you can do when asked to review is to say, I'll do it, and then get to it 2 months later. That's what you hate. And what is your expectation when you write a paper? How soon do you want it back from us?
Ideally, I expect 6 weeks. Yes, is a reasonable.
How many people want 4 weeks?
Sooner the better.
How many?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, we all want, but what are your expectations? What do you think is a reasonable response? I don't know the truth. How many people want a turnaround time in 3 weeks or less, or expect a turnaround time in 3 weeks or less?
I mean, for editorial rejects, I would like to have it in a couple of days so that I can reformat it and set it someplace else that I think might be.
I think good journals will do this. See, we talked about this a long time. Editors we see ourselves as abortionists and midwives. And the kindest thing we can do when we have a paper that's not right for us is to quickly turn it around and say it's not right for us. But it's hard. I find that the odds of somebody, the more reviewers you assign, do the combinations and permutations, the odds of some reviewer being late, I think it's, you're lucky if you get a response in 4 weeks. I think it's a good, efficient journal if you get a response in 6 weeks. If you get a response in 8 weeks, okay. I don't find it acceptable when it's any more than that. I ask people in my lab, there's nothing wrong with checking in, making sure that they haven't lost something. It happens all the time, even with the best editorial tracking software. We track and we see where things are late, and we nag the reviewers. If I have a split decision on something that is way bimodal and it's not my area, I will get another reviewer, and I'll write the author and I'll say there's going to be a delay. Some journals don't do that. But I think the long review time is just not acceptable. What are the review times? What's the worst review time you've seen?
3 months, but I think it's a split decision. Yeah, because there's like, it ended up being like 4 or 5 reviews on it.
Things happen. The editor gets hit by a truck. There's a electrical discharge wipes out the hard drive. There are lots of things that happen. But you shouldn't, if you're waiting and waiting, beginning around 6 weeks, certainly by 8, I'd call the journal office and just want to make sure if things are moving along, if there's been a delay, or if I've missed some correspondence. Your email could have sent it to junk mail. Lots of things like that happen.
As you were just advising us how to be a better reviewer for others, I was just thinking how some journal made me feel bad when I declined. Well, not on purpose, but some journal just accept, no, okay, you can't, I will take the next reviewer. But a journal will like write back and say, well, we will take a note that you declined reviewing this article this time. And it's matter-of-fact statement, and it's fine, but then it made me feel guilty. They'll always like say, we'll make a statement that you refused this time.
I think there are better reasons to feel guilty.
Yeah, but you know, editors are human. Hopefully you're getting the feeling of that. And one thing you don't want to do is fail to review for a journal to which you frequently send manuscripts. You know, we've got, I can tell you that, you know, on our computer system, there's a number of people who send us a ton of manuscripts. I mean, they'll send 4 or 5 a year, and they never accept an invitation to review. Well, their manuscripts haven't been accepted in our journal for a good long time. And when their name comes up on our computer, there's an asterisk next to it. And the asterisk, you know, this person never reviews for. So you know, you don't want to do that. It's great. I agree. Editors would much rather, we all would much rather have somebody say, listen, I can't do it, I'm traveling or whatever, than to take a paper and let it sit for 6 weeks before they look at it. But you don't want to say no too often to those journals that you're really hoping to publish in.
And I hypothesize there's a system for the editors that you rank the seniority of the reviewers, because as a junior person I always get reviews in Christmas time when I know that nobody else wants to review it, and I always get like 2 at a time. So I find it kind of curious.
And you know, my experience, well, first of all, what happens, papers come in, and then we farm them out to associate editors for our journal. So the associate editors are really key. They get the reviews, they pick the reviewers, the papers come back to them, and then they make a decision based upon their reading and the reviews, and then they make a recommendation to me. And every week we get together and we act on more or less 100, 120 manuscripts, and of those about 25 have strong recommendations to be accepted. Both reviewers and the associate editor say this paper should be accepted. And typically we can only take 8, that's all we can publish. So going all the way back, how do the associate editors pick reviewers? Almost exclusively people they know. You know, if you know the individual, you have some faith in what they're telling. If I get a review, sometimes I'll send a paper out to a review, and the reviewer will give it to their fellow or a colleague or the janitor, almost anybody, you know, just and so the review comes back from a person that I have never heard of or seen a manuscript from or have any knowledge of. And then it's hard. You always read it, and you can be convinced by thoughtful critiques. But if there's a disagreement, you're always going to go with the person that you know and trust the most.
So do you worry will contribute to a decline effect?
The what?
A decline effect? Well, a decline effect is basically associations that's well known and in view as, you know, the gold standard. But after several years, you'll see the effect association no longer be valid. And that is, of course, looking at all the publications and association and look at the trend of how true that principle that was believed to be true at one point eventually loses its strength. And I think the fact that editors pick people they know to review the topics, it's very likely a contributory factor for that.
Well,
I guess I want to speak to the earlier point you made. It's perfectly okay to decline occasionally. I think if you are hoping, if you're following a journal a lot, you know, you probably will want to review for it. And frankly, most of medicine right now is so subspecialized that some of the big journals may not be the right journal, and it might be much more useful for you to publish some things in a smaller subspecialty journal where people really follow that and really can appreciate it closely. And if that's your union card journal, you want to review for them, but you should feel comfortable to say no on occasion. I think Tony's point is, if you keep saying no, I mean, you send me things and I kind of have this vague thing of, oh God, I said no 2 times, I have to do this time. So, just because it comes your way, you know, you don't have to swing at every ball. What are other people's concerns about?
Could I just,
Yeah.
one quick, you know, what you're saying would be very true if we maintain for always the same reviewer list. When I said knowing the person, a lot of the ways we get to know them is by their publications. So if you know, if somebody sends us 2 or 3 publications and they're really good, boy, they come up on the review, but because now I have some faith. Now I've seen the person. So our reviewers are always changing.
I had a question, comment on most of the journals that I have submitted to have asked for suggested reviewers or a list of reviewers. How much weightage do the editors pay or attention do they pay to the suggested reviewer list?
So I think you're going to hear 2 editors, and we won't say the same thing.
You know, basically our policy is that if somebody specifically requests someone to be excluded because of professional competition or something such, we'll usually honor that request. We pretty much always ignore recommendations to be reviewers, and when we pick them, because we sometimes pick them, we filter their reviews through the prism of the fact that they were recommended. You know?
What if you get them from your editorial board? So some people, sometimes what I do is I review the editorial board and I look at what they publish, and I try to find people that are publishing in the field that I'm actually writing the paper in. So that's kind of how I select my selected reviewers. Does that have any?
But the suspicion is always going to be that you're not going to nominate your biggest competitor to review this. Now remember, editors virtually 100% of the time have been in the same situation you're in. I mean, I was holding your cards at one point, submitting papers and doing studies. And so we understand, you know, the thinking, but there's always, at least for us, there's always the suspicion that if somebody's being recommended as a reviewer, that the author has some reason to believe they're going to be favorable, or at least no reason to believe that they will be unfavorable. And so that colors your thinking a little bit.
But the way I look at it is the reason they're asking for a list of reviewers is the editors may not know that subspecialty or that specific area of research. And the way I suggest reviewers is based on people who have worked in that field and will understand the importance of what I have done. But if the editors put this out and say, give us a list of reviewers, but we are not going to look at it, or we are going to look at it that this is a biased list of reviewers, then it loses its purpose. I mean, the editors are now going to assign reviewers based on I don't know what. They have no idea of the work that I have done, and they will exclude or not pay attention to what I'm suggesting. But what are they going to make their decision on?
Well, I think most editors will follow your recommendation for somebody to be blackballed as a reviewer. I mean, we all acquire enemies. There are enemies, there are competitors, there are reasons that you absolutely don't want somebody to be a reviewer, and we all understand that, and it's very rare that we would ever go against them. Usually, I would pick one of your reviewers, and I'd pick one of my reviewers. So I would appreciate, but I would always be a little skeptical of your list. Mind you, I don't know what you've seen, but I never did a formal study of this, but I was never convinced that your reviewers are going to be friendlier to you than my reviewers.
Yeah, that's been our experience as well.
So, I mean, this might be a drinking buddy, this may be somebody that you know and who appreciates, but that's not necessarily a sure thing. I think most of us just pick from your list and pick from our list.
So surely you don't think that we can't figure out who would be a good reviewer. You know, we've got 12 associate editors, and we've got somebody who does atrial arrhythmias and ventricular. I mean, you know, and on occasion when we get a paper that's really beyond our local expertise, there's PubMed. We can go and figure out who's been publishing in the field, so that even when we're not totally familiar, we can usually stumble on a couple of good reviewers.
But I don't see the point of asking for suggested reviewers then,
Oh, we
because
don't.
I've spent half a day looking up
No, me too.
and finding.
Yeah,
I agree
no,
with him, because for me, a couple of the journals I submit to, they require you to, and I'm always like, huh. So I do like what you do. I pick someone that I think is good in the field, and I actually steer clear of people that I know very
Right.
well, because I don't want it to appear like a conflict of interest or anything shady. So I always steer clear of those and try to put who makes the most sense, that actually know my work maybe, but I'm not buddies with. So,
You
but
might
because
also
you're,
want to keep track of what you, on the editorial software, some of the journals do require it, and keep track of who you wrote down, because if it gets turned away from the journal and you're going to send it to another journal, you might kind of think, well, gee, did I just
Tank myself.
shoot myself in the foot twice.
What are some other experiences or questions that some of you have encountered in writing for journals or submitting? What do you think, Jose?
Well, you know, I had the same question about it, because some of them enforce you to write suggestions for reviewers, but otherwise, I mean, you know, I try to, I mean, if I know the journal I'm sending the article to, and I try to, you know, make the format of the article and the wording and so forth similar to other articles that are published in that journal, you know, in general. But
A small factoid, regardless of what you think, you will almost never be right in guessing who the reviewer is.
Right.
You know, time after time, I'll have people come up to me and say, I know you sent this paper to Dr. X, and that's why it got rejected. And they're almost always wrong, almost always. So that it's tough to guess.
The one secret that will help is the length of the review. I mean, the more senior the person, the shorter the review. And not necessarily the better review. Sometimes the assistant professors write marvelous reviews. Lengthy. The full professors, you know, they're much shorter reviews. So you can sometimes guess the seniority level of your reviewer by the length of the review.
Question
Yes.
about that. What actually is a good, as an editor, what length do you think is, I mean, obviously it depends on what's happening in the review and the manuscript and what's in there, what needs to be said, but what is a good length for you to get what you need out of it typically without it being too lengthy or too short?
I once wrote an editor's page on this. It's in the journal. We like a sentence or two to summarize the article, just so we have the confidence that our assessment of what the article's trying to say is the same assessment as the reviewer. You know, not a full summary, but just something to restate what the paper's about so we're on the same page. And then, you know, if you go through methods, results, the hypothesis appropriate, we don't, some of the best reviews I've ever seen have been one paragraph. There's a fatal flaw in this manuscript that is blank, you know. That's a fatal flaw, then that's all it needs to say. So, you know, but on the other hand, if you get one paragraph, you know, we get a lot of reviews, this is a really good paper. Or, this is not good enough for your high-profile journal, you know, where they're trying to, number one, get away with not doing anything useful, and number two, flattering you into thinking it's of value.
I think it's sometimes, it is helpful to flag what's a major concern and what's a minor concern. I'm a hopeless editor. I edit things constantly. And I'll make comments about grammar and typos and all that, and it's going to be helpful. It is fundamentally helpful, but I try to indicate what the major issues are that make me like it or not like it, or make me worried, and that would really need addressing. And I think it's very helpful. The editor appreciates that. The editor doesn't want to wade through all my obsessive edits without knowing what's the big point, Joel. What's the issue?
One thing I noticed over the last 5-6 years is that it seems like, you know, no matter how complete you think your story is, that reviewers ask for more experiments. It needs to be more experiments, and then sometimes it's even like this, that goes through one review process. You address all the, or you think you addressed all the concerns of the reviewers. It goes through another review process and comes back again. Oh, you need more experiments, more experiments. Is there? I know that, for example, I think JCD just initialized a policy change that they say it goes maximum 2 review processes, and then that's kind of it, and it's up to the editors to decide in the end whether it's been addressed to a point where the editors say, yeah, it's acceptable for the journal or not. I mean, was it just my subjective feeling that this is happening, or is it because I can imagine for the editors it's also painful to get the script for the 3rd time and go over it again and try to convince the reviewers to be on time to review this?
I suspect that editors differ. My own philosophy is that the reviewers are consultants, and that ultimately we adjudicate. And I think most editors feel some. You know, you see a review where somebody wants 5 more experiments for no really good reason. That we can see, then we'll write back to the author and say, you know, you got to answer this, and that, but you can forget about that. There's got to be some compelling reason.
You want Tony as your editor. No, you really do. You want an editor with a strong right arm who says, reviewer number 1, his 2nd point is really important. Tony, as a gentleman, is not saying ignore point number 1, but he's very clear. If you get a kind of a message from the editor, that's something. The editor is the person who makes the decision, not the reviewer. And you'll get into situations where reviewer 1 says it's too long, reviewer 2 says it's too short, and pay attention to what the editor says. You sometimes come into style conflicts about the length of a manuscript and the different categories of manuscripts length, and this is a real problem. You write something as a short communication and the reviewers like it, but reviewer number 1, asks for some more data, and you know that that's going to, and so when you write back to the editor, you say, you know, I've added one sentence addressing this in the discussion. I am certainly willing to add more, but I'm respecting your page limitations, and I defer to your judgment. If you will let us add another 200 words, we'll deal with this. And by the way, this is what it would show. But we need your decision, and editors will usually tell you straight out what they want. And frequently they will compromise and say, okay, well, reviewer, you can make it longer. Yeah.
Just, do you recommend doing that in a more formal manner when you're actually doing the revision, or just a quick email to the editor saying, this is what I'm planning on doing, I just want to see if that's sufficient?
I do it more formally. I mean, I don't like informal chats, because then if I say yes, but informally, then when I see the thing, it puts me in an uncomfortable position. I don't know, some journals advise you to correspond with the editor about if you want to do a review paper, is this something that they would want to see or something. I've always found those sorts of queries very difficult to respond to, because I don't know whether it's a good review paper. All I can say is, yeah, well, that's in the subject matter of the journal. Could be of interest. Do you prefer informal?
I agree with you 100%. You know, the thing that counts is the manuscript, and regardless of what the editor tells you, that's where you have to do it. And most of the time, editors are busy. They're not full time. By the way, it's something, maybe this is worth you being here. You know, a hint. When a paper comes back after 2 or 3 revisions, hang in there, because editors start feeling very guilty. You know, God, I put this guy through the ringer, and he did all these experiments, and then came back, and they wanted more, and now he's done all these other experiments, and they're still not happy, and the editors feel guilty, and they're in your corner. I'll guarantee.
I mean, if they hold on so long, yeah, usually.
Yeah, you know, by the 3rd revision, you've got to really screw up for the editor to turn that one down, I think.
Yeah, but so it is acceptable for the editor to read a comment, say, well, our study was designed to address 3 questions, and the other 5 questions that the reviewers would like to be addressed, we are not interested, or we don't have the money, or, you know.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean,
You'd say it a little nicer than that.
yeah, but there's some reviewers who want to write the manuscript, you know, and they say, well, this is a nice study, but it would have been interesting if they did this, this, and that. And my response is, you do this, this, and that. This is what the author wanted to do, and this is what he did. And
sometimes you always feel a little guilty that you're not able, or you cannot, or you don't want to, you know, go through what the reviewers are asking, because it will be too much. So
No. Never. I don't think you should ever feel that way. And virtually every letter I've ever seen for all journals says they ask you to respond to the critiques. They don't demand that you comply. You know, and that's what we ask. We ask for people to respond, and if they respond by saying, you know, we don't think this is germane, or you know, we were limited to this pool of animals that were procedured in such a way, and there are no more, and it would take us 5 years to do it.
Or the reviewer suggests an important next step, next direction, which we'll pursue in subsequent studies.
Yeah.
But this is a coherent whole.
Yeah, you always want to kiss up to the reviewers. I mean, you don't want to say this is a dumb reviewer, because they get a shot at it.
And if it is a dumb reviewer, you can times have a back channel communication with the editor.
Or you can put it in your cover letter.
Yeah, we disagree with reviewer one. There are ways of doing this.
And then I had a question regarding the pre-submission letters. Do you think it is actually a good idea to maybe target, I don't know, 3 journals and
I already said I didn't think so, but I don't know.
I agree with you 100%. I think it's worthless. A waste of time.
To understand if the journal would be interested in the data.
What's the editor going to say? I mean, you know, if you're interested in autism and it's a journal that publishes in neurology, child development, isn't the editor going to say, I'm not interested in autism? You know?
Besides, one of the signs of vitality of a journal is the number of submissions it receives. See, you know, when you go to your publications committee every year to talk about the health of your journal, you know, you don't want to say, well, our submissions fell by 50%, because that's not a good sign of vitality. And so, you know, if you send something to an editor that's anywhere within the realm of their interest, they're going to say yes, because they get another submission. But generally,
it may be in yours, in some specialty areas, maybe that's the way it's done. Well, I've never encountered it.
Well, so for instance, in one episode, like we inquired, for instance, at the American Journal of Human Genetics, because we had like a network-based study, and we knew that usually they do not publish that, but there were a very strong implication in human genetic diseases. So like we inquired, and the answer was, we don't usually accept that kind of study, but we do if you show a new list of candidate genes. So that was very specific and was very helpful in that case, but probably more generally.
That's your case.
Yeah. You know, we have some, I shouldn't say never to do it, but we've had some papers where people inquire, you know, would you be interested in this, where it's just way out of our interest. And for them it's valuable, because I'll write back and I never say no, but I say, based upon, you know, what they've told me, I think their chances of acceptance are very, very small.
Correct.
And so they usually get the message. But you wonder why they picked us in the first place. I mean, common sense should have been of some value in dictating that we weren't the proper place for that.
What do you hate the most about being an editor? What do you just hate to see?
Well, what I hate to see is all this stuff on academic misconduct. That just drives me crazy, and it's very prevalent. Dual publications without going through the Human Subjects Committee, plagiarism. You know, and when you get a letter, or you come upon an instance, then it really makes a ton of work over a long time, none of which is pleasant.
And you remember that person forever.
Forever.
And what I saw was issues about priority. So we write a paper together, and I make myself first author and make you second author, and somewhere along the line it's accepted or a revision, and then you write me back and you say, no, I should have been the first author. He should have been the second author. We hate that. We hate that. And that's why we've got all this horrible red tape for submissions. It didn't used to be that way, but there's a reason for it, about having people sign off on the submission. And your editor will forever remember your name if he or she has accepted your paper and you have embroiled that editor in a struggle over who really should have been the first author or the third author. We hate that. I mean, needless to say, that issues about plagiarism, all these things are very upsetting.
Conflict of interest is very important. I don't know how many of you are clinical investigators, but it's risen to the top now. If you've ever given a talk for any drug company anywhere in the world or been on a consultant panel or anything, boy, you've got to declare that, because if you don't, and one of the reviewers says, I sat right next to this person at the consultants meeting, then you're dead in the water. And that's happened to us. It's happened to us for luminary physicians, people who are virtual deities in their field, and didn't declare that they had a conflict of interest that was subsequently documented.
You know, that's actually something, it's worthwhile as you get busier, chances are you will have conflicts, and unless you keep track of them, you could get caught up in something through no nefarious motivation on your part, just because you're not keeping track. So it's have a running tab on your CV somewhere in there about who you're consulting for, when, and then it's very easy to plop that into the submission software. Tommy, you look like you were going to ask something.
No, actually, I'm pretty new to the whole process myself, so I'm still dealing with the whole issue of submission and the time.
I'm sorry, submission and?
Submission and then hearing back on your, whether it's rejected or if it's a revision, if it's going to be accepted or a revision. So I'm still dealing with.
You know, one of the things, read the editor's letter closely, because sometimes they're not clear. You know, is it some journals, for instance, don't do a major revision. They do a reject and resubmit. And they do this so they can brag to their publications committee that I rejected more than you rejected. But there are funny things that you can see in these letters, and go over them with your mentor. Make sure you're reading it the right way. If you get an egg timer letter that says, we're interested, but we need to hear from you in 6 weeks, get it back in 6 weeks. And if it's not going to be there in 6 weeks, write the editor a week in advance and explain why, and ask for an extension, and the editor will give it to you. Not an extension until Obama gets elected for a second term. A very concrete extension. You know, I need another month to do this. But don't let the clock run out, because that forces us to then say, well, gee, maybe we need new reviewers, all of that sort of thing.
You know, for our journal, we get a ton of submissions right around the national meetings, just before and just after, because that's when everybody's putting their data together, their talk, making their slides, so they've got the manuscript ready to go. So my advice is send your papers in August, or send them in after the Christmas holiday, because that's another thing. You know, everybody's going off for the holidays, so they want to struggle to get their manuscripts in and get them reviewed. But if you have national meetings, if you send them in right around the national meeting, because I told you, for instance, that we have about 100 papers a week, but some weeks we have 140, and some weeks we have 70. Now, you know, if you're in on a week where you have 70, then people tend to be a little bit less less critical, not less critical, that's a bad word, but I mean, you know, if you have 140, there's bound to be some serious competition in that 140. If you have 70, well, maybe there's not as many super papers in there and you can sneak in.
And when you are competing to be number 8 out of 140, you've got to realize, you've got to cut yourself some slack. You're going to get lots and lots of rejections. And it doesn't mean a fundamental flaw. There are priorities, there are whimsical random events. You just keep on going. So one of the things is, what do you do once you get the rejection letter?
Breathe.
What?
Breathe. Sometimes you get so worked up when you're reading the reviews for the first time. You feel misunderstood.
You should read it. You should put it in your drawer, wait a week, and read it again. I mean, sometimes you'll feel furious about the stupidity of the reviewer, the senility of the editor, all these things. Or you'll take it in and say, you know, I'm so stupid. I wrote such a poor paper. I shouldn't be in this business at all. Put it aside for a week, look at it, and then quickly decide, you know, what you want to do.
Which is it?
It's usually, there isn't a paper around that can't be improved. And the reviewers frequently will give you very good advice, some of which you can respond to and some of which you can't. I always list all the points, and I like starting off with the easy stuff. Kind of, I work my way up to it, the low-hanging fruit, you know, all the things that are very easy to respond to. I start working on that right away. And in the meantime, my mind is marinating on the more fundamental criticisms, and I'm thinking through, well, can I do a different analysis? Do I need to get some more subjects? All these sorts of things. And I'm also beginning to think, well, what might be a good venue, a different venue? But I do think it's wise to just put it aside for a week, not 2 weeks. A week.
Good advice. You can appeal, of course. You know, most every journal allows you to appeal if you've been rejected.
I've always said, once every 10 years you can appeal, whether you need to or not. And I mean, how often have you appealed something in your life?
Once.
Yeah, I mean, so, okay.
No, but you know, probably, I would say probably 2 or 3% of our rejections come back with an appeal. And if you have the very best appeal is when the 2 reviewers disagree, you know, and you come back and you say, well, you know, look at this. So if you in your heart of hearts feel that the review is just plain wrong and that you can demonstrate that it's wrong.
But be pretty darn sure about it.
Things like grant appeals never really work.
They never work.
Better to move on.
I mean, it's,
If you do think you have a legitimate case, can you request it be reviewed by a third reviewer?
sure,
Just-
request
just-
anything.
Yeah. If you have one that says is positive and one that's negative. Does that happen often?
Does it happen where
Right. When they,
Tony already, I mean, the
No, I
concordance
mean the
between
appeal.
reviewers is kind of low.
but I mean, does it happen often if they appeal, for someone to appeal and request a third reviewer and the journal, and you guys say yes and send it off to a third reviewer?
You know, I would say we probably honor, because we don't get very many, we probably honor a good 40–50% of the appeals. And it depends. A lot of times, the appeal is based upon, I just think the reviewer's wrong and here's why, and so then we'll send it back to the same reviewers plus a third. But if it's just that I can answer this reviewer, you know, then we'll sometimes send it back to the same reviewers and say, you had this concern, here's their answer, does that make you change your mind? But we have accepted, it's not often, but we've accepted papers on appeal.
The thing about particularly a paper's not a grant. A grant is not a child. You know, there are lots of journals out there. Yes, if we've messed you up, you've lost 6 or 8 weeks dealing with us, but it's not so terrible. There are outstanding journals in the field. It's probably not worth fighting very often with a journal appealing it back and forth. You can do it, but it's probably not worth it. The long haul.
Yeah, the biggest variable is the reviewer. You know, famously, Rosalind Yallow, who described radioimmunoassay, had her manuscript rejected when she subsequently got the Nobel Prize for it. But I forget what journal that was.
And she saved the reviews and had a slide for the benighted reviewer who was criticizing her for all the things in her paper. But she also pointed, other people pointed out that those reviews, maybe they missed the point, but they did help make the paper better. So.
Yes.
So this goes back to the point about the volume of manuscripts that land up on your desk after getting reviewers' comments back, and you have to make the decision. So one week you have 140 and the other 70. Is there a number that you're working with that this many can be accepted for publication? So if on the week that you have 70, more would get, there are more chances that one would get accepted versus when you have 140?
Not really, because some weeks we'll accept 10 or 11 or even 12, and other weeks we'll accept 5 or 6. So, you know, we have a standard that we're looking for, and it's for our journal. For our journal, it's like a study section, because we have almost all of the associate editors in the room like this, and then we have 4 who are on telecommunication, so they can see us and we can see them. And, you know, so that the associate editor presents the paper and makes their recommendation, but then everybody comments, and you know, what one associate editor thinks is very, very important, everybody else might think is totally boring or too specialized or not relevant. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. My answer would be that you know, we don't take 8 a week every week, even if we only got 8. You know, we vary from week to week and always try to pick the best. But your chances of looking good in a week that has 70 papers are better than looking good in a week that has 140. You just have more manuscripts to compete with.
It's devilishly hard to plan your submission to go to.
I don't see how I can benefit or take advantage of this.
A time check. We're going to stop in 2 or 3 minutes. I wanted to make sure if someone who hasn't spoken yet, who has a question, some other point. Eric, any things you'd like? Picking on you, you're right across from me.
So I've reviewed a couple papers, and I get annoyed at long papers. And there's always this sort of thing to make my paper shorter within your page limit, obviously. Any thoughts? Like, can you say you have a X number of page limit?
I'll go into that with you the next the next session, because we're going to talk about the skeleton of papers and how much heft and mass do you give various parts of papers. Page space is really precious, and it's costly. Interest span is precious, and you know, we just prefer shorter papers, papers that rest the eyeballs. I mean, the editors are by definition presbyopic, so that, you know, put in some figures so we can see and don't cheat with the font size and all that to get, we've all been there, we know that game. So try to keep things shorter when you can. It's very frustrating, particularly when it's something that you really feel passionate about and you'd like it to be longer. You can sometimes throw yourself on the mercy of the editor and say, I know it's 2 pages too long. If you're otherwise inclined to take it, I'll cut it. But be careful. Keep it shorter would be my advice.
Yeah, well, we often do that for the authors. You know, we'll look at a paper and say they've managed to say in 4,000 words what could have been said in 2,000. I have a stock letter that I send back to people who can't seem to get their paper short enough. Watson and Crick described the structure of DNA in 1,600 words on 1 page. And so I tell them, if your manuscript is more important than that, I will allow you the additional words.
So with that, thank you, Tony.
You bet.